Very good afternoon to you. It is that time where we discuss in the debate the uncensored one. So the theme of the EFF's manifesto launch today was jobs and land now. In today's edition of Uncensored, we talk about how the party could achieve their aims. And joining me in studio is Tasneem, Essop, political analyst, who is with Wits University, and Kim Heller. She is author and political analyst. To the both of you, thank you so much for making the time to come and see if we can have a look at what the EFF has proposed here today. Firstly, let's begin with the question of accountability for me, Tasneem. The EFF has put out a long list of what they say are the achievements. Yes, they were not in government in the various municipalities, but they were able to shake things up so that something can be done. It's a long list. Maybe some of us are going to have to do a very, very long fact-checking, okay? But the important bit is, did anything jump out at you about that says, yeah, the EFF is on the money, or the EFF may possibly be embellishing a little bit there?
Sure. Well, I mean, all political parties will blow their own horn when it's necessary, but let's leave that aside to you to do fact-checking in the future. Look, I think what it signifies to the rest of us is that the EFF is a decent opposition party, that they have done the work of being an opposition party, and that because they've put in that work, that they're showing that they can make the next step. They can take a step up from being an opposition party. So I think that's what it shows to us. They're giving us this long list of what they've done, and that's showing. It also reflects their previous election manifesto and what they've done from then. So I think it's an important. I mean, it's an interesting thing. It's long. And I think it's hard for, I mean, their whole manifesto comes up on my phone. It's like 570 pages or something. Yeah. So it's hard for voters to sort of digest that kind of, that length of detail. But I think it's, the bottom line is what it's telling voters. You know, this is our track record as an opposition party, and we fare well. And I mean, I think we've seen, you know, the coalitions and all of that, and the ANC being pushed to being an opposition party, and other parties being in opposition, that being an opposition party in local government is difficult. Yeah. It's not easy. It's not easy to manage. And I think that's what they're kind of trying to get at.
You know, I'm so eager to get into this discussion. I even missed this show's opening statement, and I usually do that when I start this particular segment. And basically the question here, and I'm still going to stay with you for a little bit, Tasneem, is, in your view, therefore, based on what you've heard today, is the EFF ready to govern?
Well, I think the EFF is ready to govern if voters are ready for it to govern. And,
that's a very safe answer.
It's a safe. I have a bit more to say about it. I won't leave it there. Look, I think that we haven't seen the EFF govern, and I think for those of us who are interested in looking at and understanding politics, it's going to be wonderful when we get to see what the EFF does as a governing party. Or governing party in a particular municipality, local government, because that's the elections that we're at the moment. And the real thing is whether they'll be able to breach the ward councillor election, whether they'll be able to get more of those ward seats. They've been doing well, and I mean, I think we should just be clear, the EFF has firmly entrenched themselves in South African politics. They've contested multiple elections. Other parties have not fared so well. They've managed to show growth over that period, but now they do have to breach that popular vote, that PR kind of vote vis-a-vis the ward councillor, and they need to. So if they win more wards, even, it's going to be interesting if they manage to win a substantial amount of wards. I think based on the election manifesto, it's difficult to answer that question, is the EFF ready to govern? Sure. The election manifesto does a specific thing, and maybe we can get into that. It's not necessarily a document about how the EFF will govern, right? Because we have no track record of that.
Kim, let's attempt answering that question. In your view, is the EFF ready to govern?
Absolutely. I think it's overdue. I think as an opposition party, and as a coalition government partner, they actually have a great list of achievements in a very brief time. And actually the EFF, more than any other political party, including the governing, let me say the governing party, the ANC, have set the agenda over the last several years. It's actually the EFF who put land expropriation back on the agenda. Sure. It's EFF who used their position as a coalition partner with the DA to shift what would have been a very white-focused list of delivery to a pro-black, pro-worker agenda. And we see in Gauteng that workers have been insourced, that we see the material lives of black people being improved by the EFF being in government, well, in those roles. But I think your question is very, very important because, you know, who would have thought that 27 years ago that such a revered liberation party would come into government and fail so dismally as they have. So the question around governance is important. I mean, what we have today is an ANC who are a shadow of themselves. They are politically bankrupt, they ideologically bankrupt, and actually they're financially bankrupt. And as I was waiting for you, I see Paul Mashatile, the ANC Treasurer General, the audacity to be on our TV screens today when his own workers are not being paid. So just in conclusion, and I mean, I'm sure we are going to have a very robust discussion now, but to say that, you know, let us celebrate the birthday of a great revolutionary people's leader today, who was not defined by the media, but by the people herself, Winnie Mandela. And it's not by accident that the EFF chose today to launch their manifesto. And the spirit of Winnie Mandela, I think, is infused in the youth of the EFF. And that is wonderful. And I think we're going to see a liberatory type of politics where, I mean, I don't think ever before has there been a time where black dignity needs to be looked at, where the economy needs to be shaken up, and where we have a government on its knees who cannot. I mean, this is a government who promised self-determination to African people in this country, and yet they can't deliver services. Although we have a president who blatantly goes into a community and says on the eve of an election, I'll give you electricity. But perhaps I should keep quiet for a moment. Thank you.
Tasneem, let's come to you. The EFF, are they an exception to the rule, so to speak? And the reason I ask that question is that we have seen so many splinters from the ANC, and COPE came close just in terms of the amount of votes that they amassed. But after that, it was a spiral. Coincidentally, I just spoke to one of their leaders now, and you can tell that the party is struggling to survive. Yet the EFF has managed to go from strength to strength. Are they an exception to the rule?
Yeah, absolutely, they are. I mean, we've seen a number of parties that have broken away from the ANC, and I mean, the EFF is one of those parties, right? If you trace its kind of history from the Youth League and the kind of politics that initially shaped that journey to becoming a political party, definitely comes from within that fold. So I think if you're looking at it in that broad sense of parties that have broken away from the ANC, and even parties that haven't, that have just started up fresh, you know, that they've not fared well. Those that have attempted, and it's been different reasons for each of those parties, right? And the EFF has managed to transcend that. Certainly after the first election, I have a number of sort of thoughts about why they have managed to do that. I mean, I think the kind of model that they used at the start, which was really taking along ground level activists who would have been with the ANC Youth League, and some new that were recruited at that time, into the EFF, gave them a support base, and I think that was really useful for the EFF to grow from. So I think that's a lesson maybe in you know, in elite politics and how that relates to what happens, you know, really in everyday South Africa. So I think there's definitely a lesson there. In the EFF, there's two things that we should consider here, electorally and, in a broader political sense. And I think if you're looking at it just electorally, they've done okay. They certainly, I think if you had to reflect really honestly, you'd probably be a little bit disappointed at certainly the last election for the EFF, right? If you were, firm believer in the EFF and campaigning for them, that might be disappointing, that electoral, the number of votes that they got in the last election. But I think what the other side of that is like the broader politics, right? And how they've managed to really shape, carve out a political space, shape a political discourse, and become an important player, punching above their weight, certainly, previously. So now we can no longer say, are they punching above their weight or not? Now it's going into a different mode for the EFF. So that's the kind of like, if we're looking back at how they've shaped their politics. And it is the type of, this is the last thing I say, the type of politics that they put forward, right? As I said, carved out a space. It's, a lot of it comes from the ANC, but it is different now, right? They haven't gone the kind of like right-wing or centrist position that a lot of parties have. So they've carved out a different space, and I think an important one in a country like ours. As much as, we can be critical of the EFF today and looking at the nuances of it, that's important to say.
Okay, all right. So we're going to pause right there, but when we return, we're going to talk about that issue that you say. The EFF has managed to put itself front and center of our political space. However, there seems to be a difficulty in translating that into tangible votes. And that will allow us then the opportunity to drill deeper into their election manifesto that they proposed today. And as we speak to you, the party from which Julius Malema broke away from, or should we say was expelled from, let's be clear about that. And the very person actually who nailed that, or put that final nail on the coffin, was Cyril Ramaphosa. He is continuing to campaign in the area of Tembisa, and these are visuals that you see at the bottom of your screen there. The leader of the ANC, Cyril Ramaphosa, campaigning in Ekurhuleni alongside the mayor there, Mzwandile Masina. We continue the conversation around the EFF election manifesto launch right after this. You're watching Politics Unscripted. We are discussing the EFF manifesto, and doing that with me is Tasneem Essop. She is researcher at the Society Work and Development Institute that is housed within Wits University, and we are also with Kim Heller. She is author and political analyst. Kim, let me come to you. You've heard what Tasneem had to say about how the EFF, in a way, has set the agenda, the political agenda that is, from getting former President Jacob Zuma to pay back the money, to the many other achievements that they have managed sitting in opposition benches. However, there does seem to be difficulty in translating that kind of political mileage into tangible votes. Why is there such difficulty?
I think there's a multiplicity of answers to that question. It's a complicated and necessary question, and I think one that haunts the EFF, because I do believe the support in the streets of South Africa is higher than what we're seeing in the polls. But I think it comes back to the issue related to the governing party. I think the electorate, particularly the older electorate, is still caught in this abyssus of hope. Like, we hope that one day the ANC will deliver to us. And hope has been possibly almost an ideological and political strategy of the ANC. It's like people wait, it's going to happen. But what we're seeing increasingly in the New Dawn strategy is a movement of the South African public away from hope. We're entering, in my view, an era of hopelessness, of despair, where despair, despondency, desperation, hunger, landlessness is trumping loyalty to the ANC.
Can I just come in there for a sec? Tasneem,
do I have a choice?
Do you agree? Do you agree that at the moment in South Africa, as a result of the New Dawn, there is a sense of hopelessness?
Sure. I mean, I think the failure of that project and the challenges that it has faced has meant that there is a sense of hopelessness, right? I think we've also been dealing with a pandemic that's knocked the country even further, into that sense of hopelessness. I think it's very difficult for people to see, and I speak for myself here too, for people to see a way out of the position that the country's in, right? And on top of that, I think we lack viable political alternatives and choices, right? And I think that's always the difficulty when it comes to elections. We will be sitting here in 6 weeks or whatever the time is talking about low voter turnout. I'm willing to state that today, right? That we will be talking about that. And that, that always comes back to that question of political alternatives and choices. And I think we can also throw that, to the EFF, the initial question you asked. And I think that it's, there's a question here about trust in a political party, about trust in that vision, about, seeing the party as something that you would throw your vote behind and actually getting, out your house to go and vote for them.
Yeah.
And I think that's, that's kind of where we're stuck at the moment.
So what is it then about the EFF that makes them be front and center of our politics and setting the agenda, if you like, but then it makes voters still see them with a bit of suspicion? Because that's essentially what this means, that people are disappointed by the ANC, but they are still unable to find trust within the EFF.
So, look, the question of the ANC is important, and that, the kind of position it holds, even for those who don't want to vote for them or against them, right? And I always say that you need to take that into consideration, that, some people who aren't voting for or against a particular political vision, right? So I think with the EFF, there are contradictions, and I think people are aware of those contradictions that come with the EFF.
Talk to us about those.
So, I mean, it is difficult to kind of outline a clear, one-way track for the EFF. I mean, if we look at, you spoke about the pay back the money, stuff that the EFF did. It was very, very powerful, of course. And then there was this whole thing about the Nkandla Tea Party and all of that. And I think those kind of things, I'm not, making a sort of value judgment on them, but I am saying that it creates these contradictions potentially for voters. Now, I'm just a voter myself, and I don't claim to speak on behalf of any mass of voters at all. But I mean, in my view, those contradictions are important to consider.
Do you want to come in there? Contradictions, perhaps,
yes,
are the reason why people hold back.
Well, I don't really think so. And
some people prefer to call it actually flip-flopping.
No, not necessarily. So let me go back to the point that I was making previously. I think we have to look at the ANC as a factor in this. I spoke earlier about Winnie Mandela and how EFF is honoring her. And she was the one who said the ANC is in office, not power. And we've had a constant disappointment, but people are still holding on to the hope.
Yeah.
But let me just finish this point. So, but as voters are beginning to lose faith in the political party, particularly the young voters, you must have seen the Afrobarometer survey, where the president has got very low support. It's in the 38% of people trusting him, and that was much lower amongst younger people. So I do believe that for the older generation, we have people are caught in cognitive dissonance. I'm sorry, I'm not an intellectual, maybe dissonance. I'm saying that wrong. So that they still believe the solution lies with the ANC. So I think once they realize that, and I think there's an awakening, certainly with the younger voters, and that will more and more go to the EFF. So whilst we may not see a leap of support in this election, I think we're going to see a cumulative growth for the EFF and other pro-black parties, because those parties are speaking to the very material conditions of black people, where the ANC is getting further and further away. So the situation cannot continue. It's untenable. And young people are realizing that.
Is there something about their election promises, Kim, that is possibly unrealistic, maybe? And I'm choosing to focus specifically on what has been tabled by the leader of the EFF as their election manifesto.
I don't think they're unrealistic at all. It's because we are limited in our imagination, because we are still living under the haze and cloud of apartheid inferiority. Certainly the black community and the white community, we still believe that we're superior. So we're still caught in that paradigm. It's almost like Grumsky saying we are caught in this morbid hole, like we don't, we're moving out of what was old, but we haven't started what is new. And that is why the EFF is so important, because it's representing what can be new, alongside other pro-black parties like the BLF. They're changing the political imagination of people. They're saying, we are landless people in our own land. Let us take land. That is the correct thing to do, morally and financially. They're saying, let us own the resources in this country. These are our resources. They are not the resources of white people who came here as foreigners and have been unwelcome guests ever since. So what I'm answering your question in a way to say the political imagination of this country is changing, and that's a good thing, because I believe in the future of this country in the hands of young South Africans, not my generation. My generation, black and white, have failed the people, the African people of this country.
Tasneem, I want to talk about the election promises that have come from the election manifesto of the EFF, and he talks about indigent families getting free basic electricity and water. If you didn't live in South Africa, you would think that that is something new. But indigent families have had free basic electricity and water. Am I wrong?
Well, there has been an attempt to kind of eat away at some of those policies over time, right? And certainly privatization has been one of the ways in which that has been done. So, I mean, I think, overall the sort of things that the EFF speaks to in their manifesto, and I only managed to briefly look through it after it was released, outside of the speech, of course. I think they are trying to speak to those basic service issues, which is important. But their big sort of theme of the election is very similar to what they ran with in 2016 and 2014. So it's certainly 2016, land and jobs is the big, 2019, excuse me. Land and jobs is the big principle of that election. So there is some, there's some continuity now. Then the question becomes, is that sort of theme appropriate for a local government election? And then there was an attempt clearly to show how, something like land could be done at a local level, right? Land audits in municipalities is something that was spoken about at today's rally. Expropriating unused land in municipalities and so on. And then after that, of course, comes the question of whether, so there's an application of that to a local sort of context. Is it doable within the frameworks of governance that we have? And is it achievable, right? Is it something that the EFF can be held accountable to in a few years' time?
Yeah.
So I think that is the obvious next question. And
Kim, I'm still stuck on water and electricity, because they seem to be, in a way, some of what is going to be the defining issues of this upcoming election, water and electricity. That's exactly what the president is being confronted with. I'm talking about the president of the ANC in Tembisa. In the Sunday Times today, his sister is on the front page, having been threatened by Soweto residents who are saying, talk to your brother. We don't have electricity. And it was such a situation that the police had to get involved. So I'm choosing water and electricity purposefully, and I'm saying to you, that promise to say we're going to give you free electricity and water, is that something that has not been there? I argue different, unless you tell me that it's actually something that the ANC has not been implementing.
Well, certainly the facts point to that in its time of governance, the ANC has certainly improved the infrastructure, both in terms of energy and water, and they've provided millions of households with these basic services. But it hasn't been done to the level that it should have been done. And that's not because it can't be done, but because people have pocketed money along the way, and tenders have got in the way of basic service delivery, which is an interesting point that the EFF raised today, that they're going to do away with the tender system. And what I liked was a measure of accountability within the EFF manifesto. And, you know, I also think the EFF went to pains to say that we are not a party of broken promises, which I think is direct attack on the ANC. But we're a party that we're going to deliver. We offer you commitments. And all I can say is that in the time that they have served in coalition partnerships, they have delivered. Actually, as Tasneem was saying, above their weight. They've pushed. And so I don't know why we question why the EFF, a young, dynamic party, most of whose people, councillors, live in the areas and will stay in those areas, not in the glossy suburbs, when they serve their people. They're very much part of the community, more so than other people. So it would be in their interests to up the level of water and electricity. And you're looking at me very skeptically, like you're not buying into all this.
No. But, it's not. I'm not for a second.
But the proof of the pudding will be in voting them in. So the electorate has a choice. Does it stay with a party that is delivering very slowly to them, or do they give a young, committed party like the EFF and other parties a chance to say, we are with the people, and we are with you, and we will deliver?
The reason I'm smiling at you, by the way, is because the EFF will eat you for breakfast, lunch, and supper if you said to them they were part of a coalition. They merely said, we're donors, but we're not willing participants in any of these coalition partners that were formed. So they merely said they were donors. So it's important that we stick with their wording on this, because they can come at you. When we return, I'm going to discuss what is it that jumps out at you about what the EFF said today. And I'm going to say that soon when we return, because I'm going to put that question to my guests here. You're watching Politics Unscripted. You're watching Politics Unscripted. We are discussing the EFF election manifesto. And just before the break, I said I would talk about what jumped out at me about the EFF's election manifesto proposals. And one of those, Tasneem, was, as Kim mentioned, the level of accountability. I liked the fact that they said any of our councillors, now this doesn't matter whether they are controlling that municipality or not, it has to do with their councillors adopting any social program within the community that they live in, whether it be a clinic, a school, or a child welfare center. Because that says to me that those people have no option but to make themselves, to show themselves in these communities, because oftentimes we don't know who our councillors are because they're not involved in our day-to-day issues. This, for me, gets them involved in day-to-day issues that plague a particular municipality or community. What for you jumped out or stood out?
Let me just say on that, on the point that you just made, I think one of the problems we have, and we say it often, is how out of touch elite politicians are with, you know, the everyday in South Africa, right? And I think certainly what the EFF is trying to do through that is to ensure that that level of out of touchness doesn't, you know, plague the EFF as they go into government, or at least that's, you know, that's something that I see coming from there. And on a separate matter, you know, there's a whole lot of points there that were outlined about an EFF councillor, and certainly, you know, the standard is, sure, it's very high, maybe even unattainable for a councillor. There's certainly a lot of demands. But, you know, I mean, I think in the context, given the complaints that so many people have raised around councillors and local government, is, you know, there's an attempt to sort of deal with those sort of complaints. What jumped out at me, I think, just the level of like detail, you know, municipality to municipality kind of detail that goes into the manifesto. Sure, maybe it's too much. and it takes it a bit far. It's hard to digest, all of those things that I've already said. But I think that level of detail is certainly interesting. And then I spoke about, the kind of application of their national principles to a local government context. Kind of difficult to do that shift, to make that shift. And most political parties do struggle with that around this local government election period. So those are the sort of things I found interesting.
Okay. Kim, what stood out for you?
I think there were quite a few things. The one thing that I was fascinated about and I support is the changing the the political geography. Oh, why can't I speak English on the station? Geography of South Africa, because we still have townships, we have suburbs. And what I liked today was that Julius Malema was kind of trying to blur those. Because what we have in this country, we are the most unequal society in the world. And we have masses of grotesque white wealth living astride deep black poverty as if it's a normal thing. So he's actually saying, let's blur those boundaries, because we like to think of poverty as something far away from us.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very principled and revolutionary statement. He was speaking about occupying vacant buildings in the city center, reclaiming spaces and land for black people. Yeah. And I think the whole philosophy and principle of the EFF is interesting. It's almost like we are reasserting and reclaiming the space that should be ours, not only politically and economically, but culturally. And I always love the fact that at EFF rallies, we have the real national anthem, not the one with the stem which speaks to reconciliation. And I think that's a very important statement.
Why is it wrong to speak about reconciliation?
Well, it's not wrong to speak about reconciliation, but reconciliation can't occur without social and economic justice. So if we want an anthem like that, it should be after we've seen the transfer and the return of stolen land. But that by not doing that, when the rest of South Africa is doing that, is a very important statement. They're basically saying, let's put the black child first. Let's put the cultural, political, economic, and social rights of the black child first. And it's an important statement. It's a controversial statement. And what I like as well, if we look at the economic policies, which have been consistent largely over the last few years, they're speaking about real radical transformation, actually, far more so than the ANC. And just to finish my point, because I know you're waving at me, is that they speak about radical economic transformation, about fundamentally changing and disrupting the society, which, by the way, is a good thing, where the ANC speak about RET as if it's inclusive growth, that black people must go into the economy as junior partners. So I think we must try and look at the substance of what the EFF is offering, rather than just the spectacle and the...
So let's go into the substance. When he says Dalimpofu and himself, Julius Malema, is willing to share their spaces because they own vast amounts of land, is that a realistic proposal? Because in my eyes, that is their proposal of wealth tax. But it's about sharing your space with someone who obviously does not have space to build either their house or to put in an informal dwelling in your space. Is that something that is realistic?
Yes, it is realistic, but I think effectively what he was trying to say was, in Twitter terms, if we look at Twitter language, he was almost subtweeting the white community to say, guys, it's time for a wealth tax. It's time to share. So that's how I read that. And I think it's humbling that, yes, he does stay in the suburbs, so does Dali. I think it's great and humbling that he mentioned them by name. But I think he was speaking to white South Africans who have yet to show any moral compass regarding reparations and restoration in this country.
Tasneem, so should we look at it purely as that, subtweeting in Twitter terms, and not something that is realistic? Although, when he says that, he obviously is going to shock people.
Sure. I mean, I think the concept is one that has been around in political and economic discussions for some time, right? Well, wealth tax. I mean, like, if I think back, some students during Fees Must Fall would have been speaking about a wealth tax and other forms of tax to fund free education. I mean, the point I'm trying to make is that it's come up previously, and it's an important point to make around taxing the wealthy and super wealthy. I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, I think taxing the super wealthy is an important point. Perhaps there's some shock value there. I don't want to imply anything more to the statement. But again, I mean, this is a local government election manifesto. So something like a wealth tax is maybe not something that's going to happen out of this electoral season and a local governance, let's say. But yeah, it's an important point to reiterate, I suppose.
On the economic front, in closing, does the EFF or has the EFF said anything that is likely to lift those who are unemployed?
Sure. I mean, I think it's hard to, if you read with a fine-tooth comb, then you can find ways to analyze the kind of economic policies of the EFF and so on, and that's perhaps a different debate. I think what where they position themselves on these economic principles is important because it does speak to significant realities in the country, right? So I think that's where I'd like to sort of leave it. I don't want to get into the nitty-gritties of economics, but like what it symbolizes to people, to speak to the unemployed, the working class, people who are struggling, eking out a living and a survival every day. And I think a lot of what I heard today does speak to that, right? Of course, there's bigger politics at play. There's lots that voters have to, balance in their minds when they go into the ballot, when they go to the ballot box and make their decision. But just on a surface level, the kind of economic policies that the EFF is speaking to. And again, I mean, I think there's been a certain measure of consistency around some of it coming from previous election manifestos. And as I said, just a little asterisk around this is that I haven't read the entire manifesto yet. So,
all right. Kim, in closing?
Well, in closing, I think that all I'd really like to see from whichever parties come into the fore is just please put the people first, actually, because that's something that we really haven't seen. And I think our state of politics is in such a toxic space, and we definitely need a change. We can't go on like this, that in 27 years we're going to be, some of us are going to be older and grey and still having the same conversations. So actually, in the end of the day, it's up to the people. They must think long and hard about what they want.
Yeah. All right, Kim Heller, that's where we are going to leave it. She is author and political analyst alongside Tasneem, Essop, researcher at the Society Work and Development Institute, which is housed within Wits University. Thank you both very much for your time in trying to illuminate some of what the EFF spoke about at its election manifesto. That's how